I was 58 years old when I realized my family had already decided my future without telling me. It happened on Thanksgiving morning. The turkey was in the oven, roasting slowly, filling the house with the familiar smell of sage butter and something faintly sweet that always reminded me of childhood holidays. I stood at the kitchen sink, drying my hands on a towel that had seen better days, listening to the low murmur of voices drifting in from the living room. My husband, my sister, and my mother. They were not arguing. They were not laughing. They were whispering. There was a particular tone people used when they thought they were being careful, controlled, measured, as if the walls themselves might repeat their words later. I remember the exact moment I understood that I was no longer part of the conversation. It was not anger that hit me first. It was disorientation. Like stepping into a room you thought was familiar and finding all the furniture rearranged while you were asleep. I stayed where I was perfectly still, my hands wrapped around the towel listening. Names were mentioned, dates, words like simpler and best interest. No one said my name. That silence settled in my chest and stayed there. I had been married for 31 years, long enough that people stopped asking questions, long enough that our relationship was assumed to be permanent, stable, immune to collapse. I was the woman who remembered everything so no one else had to. Doctor appointments, school events, birthdays, anniversaries. I remembered which side dishes everyone liked and which ones they complained about every year, but still expected to see on the table. I organized our lives quietly the way some people organize drawers. Nothing flashy, nothing dramatic, just making sure everything stayed where it belonged. People called me dependable, reliable. They said I was lucky. A good marriage, a comfortable home, a family that gathered every Thanksgiving like clockwork. What they did not see was how often I swallowed words to keep things running smoothly. My husband had changed slowly. Not in a way that made headlines, not in a way friends would notice over dinner. He stayed later at work, checked his phone more often, stopped asking my opinion on small things. When I mentioned it, he smiled in that patient way men use when they think you are being emotional. "You worry too much," he said. I believed him. Women my age were raised to believe that endurance was love. That afternoon, I set the table while my sister hovered near the doorway. She avoided my eyes. She had always been the louder one, the one people described as strong, decisive, impressive, the one my parents worried about and praised in equal measure. I was described as helpful. Reliable women are invisible until the moment they stop being useful. Dinner itself was polite. We talked about the weather, about traffic, about how fast time passed, the safe subjects that kept us from saying anything real. After dessert, my mother cleared her throat. She folded her hands in her lap and smiled the way she did when she was about to deliver news she believed was reasonable, even if it hurt. She said she wanted to talk about the future. That tone told me everything. When my mother said the word future, my stomach tightened. I had heard it before, used like a shield. She spoke about estate planning, about simplifying things as they got older, about fairness spoken slowly, carefully, as if the word itself could smooth over what was coming. Then she said it. "We've decided to leave the house to your sister." For a moment, my mind refused to cooperate. What house, I asked, because that was the only response my body could produce. My childhood home. The one with the creaking staircase and the tree out back where my father used to hang a swing. The house I had always assumed would be divided equally the way people pretended families did things. My sister stared at her plate. My husband did not look surprised. That detail lodged itself deep in my memory. I laughed once softly because the alternative was something far less controlled. I thought we were splitting everything I said. My mother tilted her head. She said my sister needed stability. My father said it was practical. They said I did not need it the way she did. No one asked what I wanted. No one asked how it felt. My husband remained silent, his hands folded neatly in front of him, as if he were attending a meeting rather than sitting at his in-laws' table. That silence told me more than any argument could have. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, I confronted him. He sighed before I even finished speaking like a man already exhausted by a problem he believed should not exist. "You don't need it," he said. "We're fine. Your sister has always needed more help." I asked him why he had known ahead of time. There was a pause, brief, measured. "They asked my opinion," he said. That was when the ground shifted. Because in that moment, I understood something that terrified me. He was no longer on my side. Over the next weeks, details surfaced quietly. Joint accounts I did not recognize. Conversations that stopped when I entered the room. A lawyer's business card tucked into his coat pocket. When I asked questions, he accused me of imagining things. So I stopped asking and started paying attention. I learned about the will. I learned my name had been quietly removed from certain documents. I learned my husband had been planning a version of the future that did not include me. And I learned about the woman at his office. Younger, attentive, very impressed by his stories. I did not confront her. I did not confront him. I did something far more dangerous. I became clear. I hired my lawyer on a Tuesday morning when the house felt too quiet to breathe in. The decision came after I found a bank statement folded into my husband's desk drawer. It wasn't hidden carefully, just placed where he assumed I would never look. The account number was unfamiliar. The balance was not small. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the paper for a long time, waiting for denial to arrive. It didn't. Instead, something steadier took its place: clarity. The lawyer's office was modest. No dramatic marble floors, no intimidating reception area, just clean lines and soft light. The woman who greeted me looked close to my age, calm, direct, uninterested in theatrics. She asked me how long I'd been married. When I said 31 years, she nodded once, as if that explained everything. She didn't ask why I stayed. She didn't ask how I let it happen. She explained my rights. What could be challenged, what could not, what silence cost. She spoke in facts, not comfort. And I realized how long it had been since anyone had done that for me. When I left her office, the air felt colder, sharper, like a new season beginning without permission. At home, my husband was on the phone when I walked in. He lowered his voice when he saw me, turned away. I watched him the way you watch a stranger noticing habits you once found endearing and now found revealing. That night, I slept in the guest room. He did not ask why. That hurt more than I expected. Christmas came quietly. A short message arrived from my mother about simplifying the holiday plans. A suggestion that I sit this one out. No argument, no explanation, just exclusion dressed as practicality. I packed a small suitcase. I left a note on the kitchen counter. Not dramatic, not cruel, just factual. I need space. I will be in touch through my lawyer. When I closed the door behind me, I felt something I had not felt in years. Relief. The apartment I rented was small, clean, temporary. It smelled like fresh paint and nothing else. No memories clinging to the walls, no expectations. I slept deeply that first night. In the weeks that followed, the messages began. My sister asking if I was being dramatic. My mother asking why I was doing this to the family. My husband asking when I was coming home. I answered none of them. Silence, I was learning, was not empty. It was intentional. My lawyer moved methodically. Requests, records, documentation. The will came into focus slowly, like a photograph developing in dark water. Changes made quietly, decisions justified vaguely, favoritism disguised as logic. It was not illegal, but it was not clean. And then there was the workplace affair. Nothing explicit, nothing undeniable, just patterns, timing, financial overlaps, enough to unravel a carefully constructed image. I did not want revenge. I wanted truth, and truth once uncovered has momentum. The first crack appeared when my sister stopped calling. At first I thought it was relief. She no longer had to pretend concern, but then her silence shifted. It grew sharp, defensive. My lawyer informed me that the will would be contested. Not overturned completely, adjusted. Enough to expose the imbalance. Enough to make people uncomfortable. My parents were furious. My mother called me late one evening, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and disbelief. "How could you do this to us?" she asked. I asked her how long she had planned to do it to me. There was a pause, a long one. She did not answer. My husband's confidence eroded more quickly. The younger woman at his office stopped appearing at company events. Her admiration faded once the financial reality became less impressive. He began calling more frequently, leaving messages that sounded confused rather than angry. He said he did not recognize me anymore. I thought that was interesting, considering how little he had seen me for years. The legal process was quiet. No courtroom drama, no raised voices, just timelines, signatures, comparisons. Facts do not need to shout. The house was not taken away from my sister, but the illusion of fairness was. Extended family asked questions. Sides were chosen. Stories shifted. And for the first time, I was not managing the narrative. I let it unfold. The final conversation with my husband happened in a coffee shop. Public, neutral, safe. He looked smaller, less certain, older. He asked how I could destroy everything we had built. I told him I hadn't destroyed anything. I had stopped holding it together by myself. He asked if I still loved him. I considered the question carefully. Then I said no. That answer surprised him more than anger ever could. I moved into a different apartment, one with sunlight in the mornings. I bought new dishes because I wanted to. I rearranged the furniture without asking anyone's opinion. I began seeing friends I had neglected, saying no without apology, eating dinner when I was hungry, not when it was expected. The family did not fully reconcile. I was no longer invited to every gathering, no longer consulted on every decision. And that was fine. peace I learned is not loud. It is steady. If you are listening to this and recognize the slow erasure, the polite exclusion, the way decisions get made around you instead of with you, hear this. You are not imagining it, and you are not powerless. Sometimes the most radical act is stepping out of the role you were assigned and refusing to play it anymore. If this story speaks to you, leave a comment. Share your experience if you feel safe. And if you want more stories like this told honestly and without apology, subscribe. Some endings do not need applause. They need distance. Distance changes perspective. Once I was no longer inside the daily noise of my marriage and my family patterns became obvious in a way they never had before. I started noticing how often my needs had been framed as inconveniences, how quickly my discomfort had been dismissed as oversensitivity, how smoothly decisions had been made in rooms I was not invited into. I had spent decades assuming that harmony meant silence. Now I understood it meant compliance. The first letter from my husband's lawyer arrived in early spring. The tone was polite, restrained, almost apologetic. It suggested mediation. It emphasized mutual respect. It implied that I was overreacting and that we could resolve things privately if I would simply return to reason. My lawyer read it once and set it aside. "They're worried," she said. "That's new." I felt a strange sense of validation hearing that. Worry meant leverage. We began uncovering the details more thoroughly. The timeline of asset transfers, the pattern of gifts that had quietly left our joint finances and landed elsewhere, the subtle reallocation of power that had been happening for years while I focused on keeping the household running. None of it was dramatic on its own. That was the point. Together, it formed a picture of someone preparing an exit long before I realized I was being left behind. I thought of all the moments I had ignored my instincts, all the times I told myself it was easier not to ask questions. That ease had cost me. The workplace affair became harder to deny as records aligned. Late meetings that coincided with withdrawals, conferences that matched hotel charges, emails that disappeared at convenient times. My lawyer never referred to the woman by name. "She's a symptom," she said, "not the cause." That distinction mattered. I did not want to fight a younger woman for relevance. I wanted to confront the man who had decided I no longer deserved honesty. My husband began showing up at places he thought I would be, the grocery store near my apartment, the coffee shop I visited on weekends. Each time he looked startled to see me calm. He tried different approaches: concern, nostalgia, guilt. He reminded me of our history, our children, the life we had built. I reminded him that I had built much of it alone. That conversation ended quickly. The children called next. Adults with lives of their own suddenly forced to reckon with the imbalance they had absorbed without question. They asked what was happening. They asked why I was being so firm. I told them the truth without decoration. I was done disappearing. Some understood immediately. Others needed time. I did not chase their understanding. For the first time, I trusted that my reality was enough. Summer arrived with a quiet confidence. The legal proceedings moved forward steadily. Depositions were scheduled. Documents were exchanged. The truth continued to assemble itself piece by piece, patient and unyielding. My sister tried to reach out then. She left a message filled with defensiveness disguised as concern. She said she missed me. She said this had all gotten out of hand. She said our parents were stressed and that maybe I could be the bigger person. That phrase used to work on me. This time it didn't. I met her once in a public park halfway between our homes. She arrived late wearing the same practiced smile she had used her entire life. She spoke quickly as if momentum could replace accountability. She said she never asked for the house. She said our parents made their own decisions. She said I was reading too much into things. I asked her one question. "How long did you know?" Her silence was immediate. She looked away, adjusted her bag, took a breath. That answer was enough. I stood up without raising my voice, without explaining myself. I simply said I was done discussing it. She accused me of tearing the family apart. I told her the family had already decided who mattered. I was just responding. Walking away felt lighter than I expected. The deposition with my husband came weeks later. I was not in the room, but I read the transcript afterward. His language was careful, evasive, defensive in the way people become when they realize the story they rehearsed no longer fits the facts. He minimized, he deflected, he reframed. The truth does not respond well to that. The financial picture shifted again when certain accounts were frozen pending resolution. That development traveled quickly through the family network. Suddenly, conversations changed. Relatives who had been distant became curious. People asked questions they had avoided before. My parents stopped calling altogether. I mourned that loss quietly. Not because I wanted them back the way they were, but because I finally accepted they would never be what I needed. I moved again this time by choice rather than necessity. A slightly larger apartment, a balcony, space to breathe. I bought furniture that fit me, not a compromise. I filled the shelves with books I had put off reading for years. I woke up early just to sit in silence. One evening, my husband sent a message. He said he missed the way things used to be. I did not respond, because I finally understood something fundamental. The life I missed never truly existed. It had only worked because I held it together, and I was finished doing that. By early autumn, the tension that had once lived in my chest settled into something quieter: acceptance. The legal process had stripped the situation of emotion and left only facts behind: dates, numbers written out in full, decisions traced back to the moment they were made. There was no room left for reinterpretation or sentimentality. My lawyer called one afternoon to tell me the mediation date had been set. She asked how I was feeling. I surprised myself by answering honestly. "Steady," I said. That was new. Mediation took place in a plain conference room with too much light and no personality. My husband sat across from me, flanked by his attorney. He looked tired in a way I had not seen before. Not physically weaker, but uncertain, like someone who had lost the script they were relying on. When it was his turn to speak, he focused on compromise. He said we should be reasonable. He said this didn't have to be ugly. He said we both deserved peace. I listened without interrupting. When it was my turn, I spoke calmly. I said I wanted transparency. I said I wanted fairness, not forgiveness. I said I was no longer interested in maintaining appearances. The mediator nodded, took notes. My husband looked at me as if I had spoken in a different language. For years, my silence had allowed him to believe I would always adjust, always soften, always absorb the discomfort so no one else had to. That version of me did not show up that day. The negotiations took hours. There were moments when old instincts surfaced, the urge to smooth things over, to give a little more than necessary, to prioritize harmony over equity. I felt those impulses clearly, and then I let them pass. We reached an agreement that afternoon. Not generous, not punitive, balanced. When I signed the final document, my hand did not shake. I noticed that. Outside, the air was crisp. Leaves had begun to change. I stood on the sidewalk afterward and realized I was no longer waiting for the next blow. I had already survived it. That night, my husband sent one final message. He said he hoped I would find happiness. He said he never meant to hurt me. I did not reply. Intent does not erase impact. The fallout was quieter than the buildup. Once the paperwork was finalized, people adjusted quickly. They always do. My sister stopped pretending she wanted reconciliation. She withdrew entirely, choosing comfort over confrontation. That choice no longer surprised me. My parents remained distant. There were no apologies, no explanations, just a shared understanding that the dynamic they relied on no longer existed. I grieved that privately. Not for the relationship we had, but for the one I had hoped might finally emerge. The younger woman at my husband's office left the company shortly after everything became public. I heard this through mutual acquaintances delivered casually like gossip. I felt nothing. She had never been my concern. The house was sold the following spring. Proceeds were distributed according to the adjusted agreement. No celebration, no closure ceremony. Just finality. I spent that season learning how to exist without bracing myself. I started walking in the mornings, cooking meals only when I felt like it, leaving dishes overnight without guilt, saying no without rehearsing explanations. I noticed how much mental space had been occupied by anticipation, by managing reactions before they happened. That space was mine again. One afternoon, my daughter visited. She sat across from me at the small kitchen table in my apartment and said something I hadn't expected. "I didn't realize how much you carried," she said. That was enough. I didn't need her to take sides. I didn't need validation from everyone. Being seen once clearly mattered. As the year came to a close, I reflected on the woman I had been when this began. The one who stood at the sink on Thanksgiving morning, listening to decisions being made without her. I felt compassion for her. She had done the best she could with the information she had, and she had eventually chosen herself. If you are listening to this and wondering whether clarity is worth the discomfort it brings, know this: peace does not arrive loudly. It settles in quietly when you stop abandoning yourself. Winter returned gently without drama. By then, most people assumed the story was over. The marriage ended. The assets divided. The family fractured into smaller, quieter versions of itself. From the outside, it looked resolved. But resolution and reckoning are not the same thing. I began receiving invitations again. Distant relatives, old friends, people who had kept their opinions to themselves while things were uncertain and now felt safe reaching out. They asked how I was doing. I answered honestly. I'm better than I've been in years. Some seemed relieved by that, others unsettled. There is something uncomfortable about a woman who does not collapse the way she is expected to. I returned to the family home once months after the sale to retrieve a box of items the buyers had found in the attic. Childhood photographs, old letters, things no one else wanted. Standing in the empty rooms, I felt no pull to the past, just awareness. This place had shaped me, but it no longer defined me. My sister was not there. Neither were my parents. The silence felt earned. Later that week, I learned my husband had moved in with someone new. Not the woman from his office. Someone else. Someone who believed she was starting fresh. I wished her well sincerely. She would learn what I had learned in her own time. I focused on my own life. I volunteered at a local community center, helping women navigate transitions they had not planned for. Divorce, caregiving, financial restructuring after long marriages. I listened more than I spoke. When I did speak, I told the truth without bitterness. That strength is quiet, that clarity is worth the cost, that it is never too late to stop participating in your own erasure. One evening, my phone rang unexpectedly. It was my mother. Her voice sounded older, less certain. She said she had been thinking a lot, that she hadn't handled things well, that maybe they could talk. I listened. When she finished, I told her I was open to a conversation, but not to rewriting the past. She agreed. That was progress. We met for coffee weeks later. She spoke carefully, avoided certain topics, apologized without fully naming what she was apologizing for. I accepted what was offered. Forgiveness does not require full understanding, but boundaries do. When we parted, I felt neither relief nor resentment, just neutrality. That felt like growth. Chapter 10. Spring arrived with an unexpected sense of momentum. I made changes not because I needed to prove anything, but because I finally had the energy to choose. I redecorated my apartment, traveled alone for the first time, learned what I liked without considering anyone else's preferences. I noticed how often I laughed now, not politely, not reflexively. Genuinely. My husband attempted to contact once more through an email carefully worded to sound reflective. He wrote about lessons learned, about regret, about how things had turned out differently than he expected. I read it once. Then I deleted it. Some conversations do not need continuation. The final legal paperwork arrived shortly after. One last signature. One last confirmation. When it was done, I closed the folder and placed it on the shelf with other completed chapters of my life. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt complete. At a small gathering one evening, someone asked me how I found the courage to walk away after so many years. I thought about it. Then I said the truth. I didn't find courage. I found clarity. And clarity does the rest. If you are listening to this and standing at the edge of a decision you have been postponing, know this. You do not need permission to step out of a role that no longer fits. You do not need to wait for approval to reclaim your dignity. Sometimes the most powerful revenge is not destruction. It is refusing to disappear. The call came on an ordinary afternoon. I was folding laundry, sunlight spilling across the floor when my phone rang. A number I didn't recognize. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail. I had learned that not every interruption deserved my attention. But something told me to answer. It was my father. We hadn't spoken in over a year. His voice sounded thinner than I remembered. Not weak, but careful, like someone choosing each word before letting it leave their mouth. He asked how I was doing. I told him the truth. That I was well, that I felt settled. There was a pause. Then he said something I had waited my entire life to hear without knowing it. I should have spoken up. He didn't explain. He didn't justify. He didn't bring up intentions or misunderstandings. He simply said he should have spoken up. That sentence landed quietly and stayed with me. He told me my mother's health had declined. Nothing dramatic. Just the slow accumulation of years and choices. He said she asked about me more often now, that she wondered if I was angry. I told him I wasn't angry. I was clear. Clarity, I had learned, is often mistaken for coldness by people who benefited from your silence. He asked if I would consider visiting. I said yes. Not for reconciliation, not for closure, but because I wanted to see them as they were now, not as the people I had spent decades trying to please. The visit was brief, polite, careful, real in a way our interactions had never been before. My mother apologized again, this time more directly. She named favoritism. She named fear. She named control. I listened. I did not rush to comfort her. That too was new. When I left, there were no promises made, no declarations of renewed closeness, just an understanding that the old dynamics were finished. That was enough! On the drive home, I realized something quietly profound. I was no longer waiting for my family to become different people. I had already adjusted my life accordingly. That realization felt like freedom. The anniversary of my departure came without ceremony. No calendar reminder. No dramatic reflection. Just a passing awareness as I poured my morning coffee and noticed how peaceful my body felt. I thought about the woman I had been at the beginning of this story, standing at the kitchen sink, listening to whispers, sensing something was wrong but telling herself it was easier not to know. I felt tenderness for her. She had survived by adapting. I had survived by choosing. There is a difference. I am often asked now if I regret how things ended. The honest answer is no. I regret how long I believed my worth depended on being agreeable, on being reliable, on being the person everyone leaned on without ever supporting in return. But regret is not where I live. I live in the present, in a home that reflects me, in relationships that require mutual respect, in a life that no longer demands I disappear to function. If you are listening to this and recognizing pieces of yourself, the quiet compromises, the slow erosion, the moments where your absence goes unnoticed, hear this clearly. You are not invisible. You have simply been taught to stay small, and you can unlearn that. Leaving is not always loud. Revenge is not always sharp. Sometimes the most powerful act is reclaiming your dignity and walking forward without explanation. If this story resonated with you, let me know in the comments. Your experiences matter more than you think, and if you want to hear more stories like this, told honestly, calmly, and without apology, subscribe. Some lives are rebuilt quietly, but they stand stronger than anything that came before.